Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About Myths, baby. This episode is with Alex Wells, a past guest, talking about women's work in ancient Sumeria, such as weaving. It's so much fun. It was such a fun episode to write. As you will be able to hear, Liv and I were just full of just ADHD struggles that day, or we just could not get our brains to work sufficiently, but you know, it all came out wonderfully and well, and we're so thankful to have people like Alex Wells come on and teach us about things that we don't know about and want to make more accessible for everyone else. And this was such a fun topic, and was really interesting to see the differences between Greek culture and Sumerian culture and their approaches towards women generally. Anyways, I won't keep you any longer. We'll get right into it. Bye. Weave, baby, weave. Women's work in ancient Sumeria with Alex Wells.
But I mean, yeah, did you end up learning about weaving in the Sumerian culture, you know, just purely because you're so involved in researching the culture broadly, or did you have like an interest in weaving? I guess I'm just sort of curious, you know, how that comes up. Not to be too fine a point on it, but like weaving is a woman's job, so it's nice to hear that a man has looked into it at all. So I guess I'm just kind of curious how that came about.
Yeah, so my podcast chronologically starts in the Neolithic. So I started off looking at like what were the earliest kinds of weaving that people were doing. And it turns out for the first several thousand years of the Neolithic, they, even after they had domesticated sheep, right? So they domesticate sheep around the end of the 8000s BC. So kind of when they're domesticating wheat and barley and these other kind of like Neolithic domesticates, they start keeping sheep and goats fairly early on. But wild sheep and goats do produce some fiber, but you can't really shear them in the same way that you can with domestic sheep. Because a lot of the fibers they grow are these kind of coarse hairs that aren't good for weaving. And they also shed the finer wool-like hairs in the spring and the summer. Oh. So, you know, wild sheep are not really efficient at producing wool fibers. So probably for thousands of years before we breed sheep to be more wool producing, people are probably weaving primarily with plant fibers. So flax is the famous one, right? It's a kind of like water intensive crop. You can grow a lot of it in places like Sumer that have, you know, irrigation fields.
Yeah.
But oak trees, actually, the inner bark has these really great fibers that basically, you know, you strip out the outer bark, you leave the inner bark in water, and the water breaks down the pectin so that you're left with just the fibers. So that even if you don't have any kind of agriculture or, you know, livestock or whatever, you can still harvest enough natural fibers to weave clothes. And that may kind of explain why the oak tree is so important in all these different cultures.
That is so interesting. Okay, I'm already just into the fact that knowing this like really like Neolithic aspect, that's so interesting. I mean, it makes sense. I've obviously heard of flax. I mean, I have lots of flax linen in my house now. But it's interesting. I mean, oak trees, and they are important because like oak is sacred to Zeus. So yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Okay. So like, and then I somehow I feel like this is not the first time I've spoken about specifics of shearing sheep on this podcast, and yet I've still managed to forget. But yeah, so they started realizing that if they, you know, bred them in certain ways, or I imagine it's about shearing them in certain ways to get it to grow differently.
So actually, They didn't shear them at first. So the thing about sheep and goats, the bones themselves are very similar. So archaeologists often can't tell if a random bone that's not one of the different ones comes from a sheep or goat. So often archaeology, they treat them together, right? It's,
Makes sense, yeah.
pigs and cattle and sheep and goats. So early on in the Neolithic, they're probably keeping more goats. And when we can tell them apart, we do have evidence that very early on, when they figure out large-scale intensive animal herding, the vast majority of these herds are goats for two reasons. One, they produce more milk per goat, per female goat. And they also have a shorter gestation period, which means that they can, give birth to more goats. So goats are better for, just subsistence if you're not using them for secondary products. And then of course you can turn goat hair into, thread. So you can spin the fibers, even if they're not goats bred for fiber production. So over the course of, it's hard to tell, probably by the 5000s BC and definitely by the 4000s, they are starting to breed sheep that do maintain their longer, fibers a whole year and, grow less of the thick fibers that aren't good for weaving. So we can tell that primarily because we can see more spindle whorls in the archaeological record. So usually the wooden dowel part, the spindle itself, decays, but the whorl at the bottom that, gives it the physical ability to spin around while remaining stationary. Those are usually made of clay. They're often repurposed from potsherds, or they can be just made very easily with, anyone with clay in a kiln. So those get really, really, really common around the 4000s.
Yeah.
So
I know that's true of Greece too. Like the only things that tend to survive of that type of thing is like the whorls and then the loom weights that they're using by then. So it's so interesting it's so interesting and infuriating the way that everything else like decays and then we don't have evidence of it. We just have like these little bits, but that's really interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and the thing about loom weights. So we know that they were using loom weights in like Bronze Age Greece and Troy. I think we have Greek style loom weights at Troy. In Mesopotamia, like Sumerian times and before, they are either using a kind of rectangular frame loom. So their cuneiform sign for a loom is just a rectangle. So it's probably just a frame that you hold. And if you need to, so you there's not any kind of like lever. You turn the frame around and weave from the other side and then you turn it around.
Interesting.
So it's either that or they're weaving on the ground, kind of like spread it out between two pegs on the ground that gives you retention. So neither of those would leave any kind of material record. Yeah. So unfortunately, we don't really have. There is one piece. I was just looking at this recently. It's been described as a hut idol, or I don't know. Basically, at some point, someone interpreted as a physical symbol of a house. But that's probably not the case. These are in like the 3000s and late 4000s in northern Mesopotamia. These are probably a structural part of a loom. We don't know what it did or how it was used because we only have this thing that can be made of clay or metal or whatever that may kind of look like a house, but may be a structural part of a loom. So other than that, we don't really have any parts of the machinery themselves. We only have the spindle whorls that were used to make it into thread.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so that's just generally interesting. Did I see right in your the sort of outline you have that there is like mythology or gods associated too?
Yes.
Yeah. Am I jumping ahead? I'm just excited by that.
No, I real quick before we get to Sumer, there's kind of like one more thing in the Chalcolithic that I think is like an important part of the chronology.
No, please.
Is that
timeline?
Like obviously women at the household level had been weaving since they had been able to. And, as far as we can tell, there's no way to be certain, but probably it is a woman's job from early on. Because it's, the kind of criteria for women's work, quote unquote, in prehistory is the kind of thing that can be done at home while you're watching kids, the kind of thing that can be put down and easily resumed. Again, childcare is a demanding job. So, probably it makes sense. We see women doing things like potting, making pottery, gardening, things like that. Yeah.
It's also like, I think a more delicate thing too, where like they like when people have smaller hands to be working on things like that as well. That's interesting.
There's actually a study. There's a site in northern Syria where they studied it in the 3000s and the 2000s, kind of like before and after like industrial production. And at least judging by the size of the fingerprints, it seems like women were doing it when it was a household job, and then men took over and when it became a kind of industrial professional job.
Sounds right.
Right. But over the course of the 4000s, probably chiefs or some kind of like local leader, maybe a tribal leader, something like that, that have these extended households that are not just their extended family, but the chief has dependents and slaves and artisans and other people that are kind of like separate from the economy outside the chief's household. They're dependent on the chief. They get their food from the food that the chief takes from the rest of the people in the political system.
Mm-hmm.
And these, powerful households, elite households, whatever you want to call them, are kind of the first workshops, because especially with women, right? Women are more likely to be captured in warfare rather than killed.
Mm-hmm.
They're more likely to be enslaved because they're easy to fit into a tribal, like a patriarchal tribal system, right? You're not incorporating men as rivals. You're incorporating women into the system that is already built to have women as kind of dependent laborers.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a powerful enough chief, you can have, you could take a bunch of women and force them all to weave in the same workshop. So we do start to see that in the 4000s ish, where we have, these large, important buildings, probably of important households, and we have hundreds of spindle whorls in them. So probably they're already assembling these kind of industrial teams of women that we will start to see in Sumer.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So
do we know anything about? Sorry, and this might be too early at this point in the general timeline, but I'm just generally curious if I'm imagining these women would be probably enslaved, and I'm just curious if there's any record of them getting paid for labor, and again that might come down later when we have records, but
right. So that's actually so in Sumerian the word for female slave is geme, but it doesn't necessarily only refer to chattel slaves.
Right.
It's kind of a dependent female manual worker. So they could be slaves, they could be orphans or something that are raised by the temple and have no choice but to work for the temple. There's all kinds of other ways. Debt slaves at a later period in history, maybe earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all kinds of ways that women can end up as a dependent worker, even if they're not formally taken in battle and turned into chattel.
Yeah.
But we do have records. All right. So from Lagash is a Sumerian city-state around 2400 BCE. We happen to have, I think it's 1800 cuneiform tablets. So a huge amount of just administrative text from this one temple household that is the temple to the main goddess of the city. So there's a male and a female goddess that are the married couple gods in charge of the city. And they are represented by the king and the queen. So probably already by this point, the kingship is seen as a kind of patrilineal, passed from father to son in most cases. It does sometimes switch from between different families in a way that we don't totally understand, but it does seem like it's a father to son kind of thing. And whoever the king's wife or main wife is, she is in charge of the temple to the goddess, which is not only a religious institution, but a huge economic institution with hundreds of, again, artisans, weavers, potters, scribes, manual workers to work the fields and, herd the cattle and so on. So we have a whole bunch of these texts from this particular temple to the goddess. The goddess's name is read sometimes ba, sometimes ba-u. We don't know how to read the second syllable. So we do have you asked about whether these workers were paid. And the answer is yes, they were paid in barley. So everyone has to eat. And even slaves and the lowest of manual workers are paid in the kind of minimum wage of barley.
Right.
Which I believe is 12 selas. And I think a sela is about 0.7 liters. So I don't know, do the math, maybe 8-ish liters of barley a month would be their wage.
Right.
And
so
then,
by wage, it's really keep them alive to keep working. Right. So really not so much pay as it is just not dying.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And especially in the 2000s, sorry, what?
No, I don't
feel like I don't think much has changed. Honestly.
Yeah, it's not that far off. Yeah, that's an interesting. I mean, it's nice we have record, I guess, of what they got, but also that seems like a line to draw about whether or not a person is really getting paid. But I love that we have those records, though. That's always my obsession.
Yeah. And I mean, as far as, because, in the 2000s especially, there is a silver economy, and silver is starting to be used as a precious metal in the way that we would talk about currency. But most people don't have access to it because your average person is either working on their own family farm to buy barley to eat, or they're a dependent worker in some way, right? Working on someone else's barley farm to grow barley so they can eat.
Right. So I guess it's not that different. Everyone's kind of living in just a world of barley.
Right. And, higher level temple officials and administrators, they do get barley to, as their own personal food. They get extra amounts to pay their own dependents. And then, of course, if you're an important person in the temple hierarchy, you're also getting distributions of butter and wool and, fine garments and oil and things like that, because the temple economy is kind of the main engine that produces all these goods. And the better off you are in their eyes, the more they will give you of that. So the lowest manual workers, including the women, are getting this kind of like minimum wage in barley. But we do have records that some of them are promoted. So they work in these teams of, I think 10 to 20-ish. And there's like a team leader, like a shift leader, that she gets listed at the beginning of the roles, like, the list of distributions. She gets a higher wage. And that probably suggests some combination of administrative role over the other weavers. And maybe she's doing more skilled work.
Yeah.
So, there's just spinning. There's lots of different jobs that are kind of subsumed into weaving and textile production. Yeah. And some of them are more skill intensive. So probably certain people are getting promoted. They get paid more. And they have kind of administrative responsibilities. Yeah. And then above that, we have the actual bosses that are, again, higher level in the temple hierarchy. These tend to be men, though not always. Men can own, like some women own some land, but generally the male landowners within the temple hierarchy, given temple land and teams of temple workers to grow their food on their land, are men. There's one exception. She seems to be, which is a woman who has this higher level administrative role. It's not clear. She may be from a wealthy family and is connected with weaving because she was kind of making her way through the administrative hierarchy. Actually, I have my notes up. I may be able to find her name.
Delightful. I just love the way we have records of so many things. Like, thank you, cuneiform tablets. The Greeks could never. Yeah, but just like the way the Greeks did not preserve that type of stuff for us, it's very annoying.
No, yeah.
Well, that's the funny thing about papyrus, right? I mean, it's very convenient for them to use, but it's just kind of a trick of preservation that clay tablets, which are easy to use when you have infinite clay, happen to preserve this information that they didn't, they weren't carving this information into stone.
No,
they were just,
I know.
Internal records.
It's such, and I mean, that's the like wonder and enormous frustration of studying this stuff, right? Is that like most of it we know, but for entirely random reasons, and we just have to like work with what we have.
Right.
Yeah.
So the woman I was looking at is Mete. So she was both a weaving supervisor and at some point in her career, she was the head of female royal servants. So
that's cool. I mean, to a degree.
Right. So the members of the royal household, the king, the queen, and their children had these huge retinues of servants. They had hairdressers. They had, personal, servants to do their kind of like grooming and stuff. And of course, these people were also part of the temple hierarchy. And even though they are servants, these are often the best paid people and the most powerful people that are not literally kings and queens because they are personally in the room at all these discussions and, have the most intimate access to these royal family members. So she may have been from a, wealthy family that gets put in the administrative hierarchy and ends up in charge of weaving, who knows?
That's really interesting. Yeah. Oh. I mean, just generally, I guess I can't get over the number of records because I'm just thinking like, oh man, like what we know about the Greeks and weaving, nothing like this. I mean, we know more of like, I think how physically they were weaving, but not like who was getting paid. Unless, I mean, yeah, Michaela, you look like you're thinking about whether I'm wrong. But like, yeah, it's so interesting. And I mean, again, this is also that I've not done enough research into the Greek, but I just am so desperate to know more about like who was actually doing it and like what their lives were like. And it just kind of seems like at least we have some things about that.
I don't know much about later periods. If I'm thinking to like Bronze Age, whoa, my voice. I'm thinking to Bronze Age. I know we do have records from some of the palatial centers because, they got burned to the ground, that there is evidence. So we do know that there were people who were employed.
Also probably getting paid in barley or equivalent.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. They were being paid in food. And room and board essentially was what they made. And I think for the most part, when it came to weaving, it was all all of them were women.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reason I've looked into this is through family dynamics, because it'll talk about like they give the food for the workers, but they also give a certain amount of food for the children of the workers as well, because the children are there with the workers at the same time. So yeah. So yes, it was happening. I think Pylos was a big center for
that makes sense.
Textiles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's one of those things that, and this is like a very broad statement, but I think about it too often to not say it. But like just the ways in which we just completely forget about the logistics for like how people were clothed. Like I just think that's one of the most like ignored things from a casual person's, historical standpoint. If like anyone just like casually learning ancient history, like no one is talking about who's making the clothes, and it's I just think I didn't even think about it until so long, and then you realize like, oh, in order for anyone to be clothed right now, or for any ship to have sails, or any of this bedding, like women had to be doing all of these jobs.
And I think also in the modern age, we're very like divorced from what it takes to make clothes.
Exactly.
I say as I'm sitting here knitting socks.
I know. I meant to comment on that earlier. I was like, it's very appropriate.
But it's like, I don't think a lot of, especially with like the rise of fast fashion and everything, people are like, oh, it's so easy to go get these things. And I'm like, no, actually, like until recent, in the past like less than 100 years, clothing has been, it was a investment. And people didn't have the amount of clothes that people have today. It's absolutely unnecessary. We don't need the amount of clothes. And I'm saying that to myself as well. So
to your own closet. But no, you're right. And it's this, it's the like modern capitalist divorcing from, how things actually happen. But then obviously too, like in terms of learning, it's also in large part that like we learn about the wars and the conquering, and we don't learn about how those men were not naked, because that was the women's job. So
but on the imagery, they're all naked. So
well, that's true too.
So maybe
that's true too.
no women involved.
Yeah. Were the Sumerians as obsessed with being naked? This is very off topic, but also important.
So the short answer, they generally men wore some kind of like skirt kilt type thing.
Yeah.
And women wore a kind of like shawl cloak all over their entire body. There is a particular kind of priest that there was basically a servant to the statue of the god that, in all intents and purposes was the servant of the household of the god. Those priests had to did all their important jobs naked. And like sacrificial animals, they had to be free of any kind of bodily imperfections.
Okay.
So there's a famous monument, like a stone vase called the Warka vase, named after the modern site name of Uruk. And one of the rows of that is just a line of naked guys carrying goods to give to the temple. This is relevant to my interest because basically what they're doing is they're bringing the bride wealth for Inanna as part of the sacred marriage between the king of Uruk and Inanna.
Ooh. Okay, and they had to be naked. Love it. Glad I asked.
Right.
Glad I asked. Every ancient culture had some reason why everyone had to be naked for something, at least. And I respect that.
I wanted to say though, as you were talking about modern fashion, Kayla, and I mean, I think it's worth pointing out that even though many aspects of textile production have been mechanized, sewing has not. So I mean, you could have machines that can make clothes or can make cloth quickly, but still you have large workshops of women in the global South largely that are doing this kind of like factory manual labor that someone has to sew all these garments together, and we kind of haven't gotten over that. It's still this really labor intensive exploitive process.
And there's like this explosion to, especially in the past couple of years after the pandemic, people have started getting into like yarn craft, like knitting and crocheting now, and people like are realizing actually just how much work it takes. And we can mechanize like knitting, we can do machine knitting, but crochet is something we can't do. And people are learning that now, and then they're like, they go out there and they learn how to crochet and they're doing it, and then they're thinking now about like, oh, when we see something crocheted in a store and it's on sale for like $20, it's like that probably took whoever made it X amount of time, and how are they actually making a profit from this? Because like I've had people classmates and stuff, and they see me knitting, and they're like, "Oh my god, can you like knit me a sweater?" And I'm like, "Oh my god, do you want to give me like $600?" And they're like, "What?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "I'm dead serious. Like, I'll do it if you pay for the materials and my time. I'll do it."
Yeah, that takes forever.
Like,
Right.
No, and to just like, I mean, to link both of your points and put a really fine point on it, like, yeah, all of that is so true, and the disconnect we have is the capitalism that has turned it into
a commodity.
like all basically slave labor of mostly people in the global south who we in the west or civilization west, and that horrible word, you know, we just buy as if it's nothing, because to us it costs so little, even though
And
people are like dying
we aren't
to make
confronted
it.
with it. We aren't shown it. And so like I think it's sort of the same situation when people like factory farming, horrible. What they do to animals in like factory farms, not okay. But then I think of like my people, like traditional hunting and stuff. Like, say traditional hunting, they're using guns, but like when people are horrified by that, I'm like, what do you mean, man? Like, first of all, those people are excellent hunters. Like, they've been hunting their whole life. They're gonna know how to kill an animal in a way that is gonna cause the animal to leave. But people are just so divorced from that kind of thing, and like so divorced from what food preparation actually looks like, and like we're so used to going to the store and buying our nicely packaged things that like
you're not just giving barley for working for a little while. Yeah.
You're like, what do I do with this barley? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Cry.
No, and I think that's why, like, having, I mean, even just this platform where it's like it's entirely relevant to talk about the ancient practice of weaving is such a great reminder that it is something that is still very well, like, not again, like the weaving has been mechanized, but the actual creation of clothes is still something being done by human hands. We just don't see it. But like that reminder of like how
just
long
much
this is
labor
something.
it is.
How much labor, and just how long this has been like this human act. And it's really interesting to, I don't know, look at in all sides of the ancient world, and then also the terrible capitalistic mess we live in now.
Truly.
So yeah, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead, but I'm not by talking about the mythology side of it now, or if you're, I mean, I love that you went as far back as Neolithic. So if you have other timeline stuff that you wanted to look at first, that's great too, because all of this is just so much older than what we usually work within. It's very interesting.
I mean, I guess just to connect the threads, I guess.
Yeah.
But,
good one.
Yeah.
See what you did there.
But I was talking about these kind of like elite households that are, amassing these large, dependent teams of workers. Those basically grow into the temples. I mean, like people disagree on exact, because I mean, the operative difference between a temple and a palace household is that the palace household has a living family that is at the center of it. It's unclear the extent to which a temple was, because I mean, the temple always has a head priest, and the head priest lives in the building generally, and has all the most important roles, and exercises the most power in a political sense. It's unclear if that's just the ruling family and the specific language they use to talk about it is this kind of specifically Sumerian. Well, yeah, this is our king, quote unquote, but he lives in the temple, and he's primarily the king of Uruk is a husband of the goddess Inanna.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, that's the way that he's incorporated into the god's household. But in a functional sense, the palace is just an overgrown chief's household, and it has all the same teams of dependent artisans and so on. And then I just Michaela, you were talking about being able to trace family dynamics in these texts about the women weavers, and we do actually kind of inch up to that in these texts I was talking about from Lagash, because basically, these are women, many of them have kids, and what appears to be the case is that their sons stay with them while their young children need to be cared for, but at some point around age 6 to 8 or so, they get assigned to a different job, or at the very least are no longer being supervised by their mother full time.
Do you know if they get like assigned to whatever, or are they aware of who the father is to the point that like they would then be assigned to his whatever his profession is or his craft is? Because I
So
know that will
generally,
happen in the Mycenaean world sometimes.
as far as I know, the texts don't specify. We do
Okay.
have some information about jobs being passed down. Like there was one in the same Temple of Lagash. There was one girl that was an orphan, but she was raised by, I think, a pig herder. So she ended up growing up to become a pig herder.
Okay.
So there is some
That's
evidence
cool.
that the kind of manual, or like the palace dependent jobs and temple dependent jobs are passed down generationally.
Oh.
The sons don't work in weaving, so if they are assigned to their fathers, we don't have any information who their fathers are.
Yeah.
We do have the children noted that they are children, and who their mother is in the weaving team. Generally, girls appear to have grown up to become weavers. These particular texts only cover about 8 years, I believe, so we don't have generations and generations to track that.
Yeah.
But it appears to be the case that girls would grow up and join the weaving team. And then we do have a couple cases of one woman whose name was Sasa, who happens to have had the same name as the queen at the time, but different woman. She appears to have been the kind of team babysitter or maybe the adoptive mother. So in one record, she's listed with 5 boys and 2 girls, which is a lot of kids for one person, but not, impossible. And then the next year she's listed with 2 boys instead of 5 boys. So either 3 of them died, or she was kind of like taking in these children from a different woman on the team or a different woman in the temple household. So around the same time, there was a new woman hired named Munatame. She had 1 son and 1 daughter. And then she disappears from the records. Oh. And then when she disappears, Sasa now has 3 boys and 3 girls. So it appears that she took in Munatame's children.
Oh, okay.
This is so interesting. We have their names. That's so cool.
Exactly. Yeah, so Munatame appears in the records, but her barley ration is reduced to 0. Oh, so either she died and they're just keeping her in the texts to just kind of like, no, we didn't move team. She is just dead and her barley ration is 0. Or she might have been moved to a different group. But her son is given a ration of 12 sila of barley, which is a kind of child-sized amount. So I don't know. Maybe I was wrong about the minimum wage earlier, because I think it's below the minimum wage for an adult. But
so it's still more about enough food, I guess, to keep them alive. But minimum wage seems like a right enough analogy. But that's I'm just so obsessed with the fact that we have not only all these real women's names, but also that level of detail about the children involved and just this team structure. That's so interesting.
Yeah, honestly, one of my favorite things about the invention of writing in Uruk is that in these earliest texts, like the very earliest generation of text written with proto-cuneiform writing, we have lists of slaves and or dependent workers, right? These kind of the lowest level of manual worker. I think one text has a list of 211, I think, of their names, right? Written out, the slaves' names. And then we have the important, the head priest of the temple and so on. But they're always referred to with their office title, like the job title of their office, or they're depicted in art, right? As a big important guy holding a mace or whatever, or they are, they sign documents with a cylinder seal that has a kind of like pictorial depiction that everyone at the time would, okay, that's the seal of the head priest. But they never write their first names, so we don't know the names of the most important people running society. We do have the names of the hundreds of slaves who worked in the fields. We can't necessarily read all those names that early. So they don't look like Sumerian names. It's not clear whether they are from somewhere else or whether they're just using an early version of Sumerian that we can't read. Yeah. But it is ironic that we have the workers' names, but not the kings.
I love that, though. That's that's ideal, honestly. I mean, it's not, obviously, but it's very nice for once to have those people represented or just even remembered. That's the saddest part when you think about just the very real everyday people who were not fancy at all or were enslaved or all of these things, and just the fact that their names aren't lost is really nice.
Right?
Yeah, just the everyday stuff, and that's what seems to really come out of Mesopotamia and the Sumerians specifically, but just ancient Iraq overall, in this really beautiful way of just having record of this people, that's so nice. And also just everyday stuff, random shit. I I want to know about the most random stuff.
I mean, I don't know. I do love that as early as 2700 BCE or so, we do have just random people's names. There was a guy from ancient Ur named Lulu. And I think there were two different guys. One of them owned a lot of land, and one of them was like a carpenter or something like that. But it's a nickname for a longer, because Lu is the Sumerian word for man, so it's probably man of something. But everyone calls him Lulu.
That's cute. Yeah, that was my grandparents' dog's name when I was very young.
Nice.
That's cute. No, I mean, and nicknames or short forms and stuff too. Like that's even more just like so normal and real about these people. It's very
right.
Yeah, it's just really lovely. So like, do we know like what they made? Is it all really like obvious? Were they just, weaving clothes, fabrics for whatever? Like, do we have any kind of specifics, just since we seem to have such random things from this world?
So we know from the records that some of them were weaving wool, some of them were weaving linen. So It does specify in their job titles which is which.
Yeah.
It doesn't really break down the industrial process, because all that probably would have been, the records are only concerned with how much barley goes out of the temple coffers.
Right. They're worried about the people and the eating, what they're eating more than anything.
Right. So the actual division of labor was probably done, orally and less formally. As far as what they were making, it's one of those things where just like, in the records, they don't specify generally, because they would have known. Like, you go up to the person and ask. But in general, we do have a lot of names for garments. But it's kind of like fruit or minerals or other things or birds or whatever, where we have we know that this is the name of a type of garment or a type of bird or whatever. But because there's no way to tie it to a specific, piece of art or anything like that, and of course we don't have the garments themselves, we don't know. Right. So sometimes we can see it's like, okay, well, there's this one particular kind of garment that appears to be associated with Bahrain and like the Persian Gulf area.
Cool.
And there's certain things that are kind of like more priestly robes and stuff, but no one ever explains that in the text. So we kind of don't know for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Without the connection, you're like, well, I have the word, but what does that mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, generally, I think what they would have been making is property for the temple household. So, I mean, like I said, it's giving out gifts of garments and, cloths and stuff to its dependents. It's giving them out as gifts. So a messenger comes and brings word from, some other place, and you give the messenger a little gift. They're making bedding. So again, the sacred marriage is kind of one of these most important religious rites around which all of Sumerian civilization revolves. And, you have to create a new set of bedding for the bed that you put the god statue on. So they're making, and of course you have to make robes for the people working in the temple. So again, it's just kind of like reproduction of what we are doing in the temple every day, and someone has to make all the new garments.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just in the temple structure, I'm sure I asked you about this more last time, but my memory is shot and I have no idea. But like the whole temple structure is just so interesting. I mean, it kind of sounds like what you were saying earlier, like that is sort of the equivalent or potentially the equivalent of like their leadership structure, or was it something that there were like a lot of these temple like sort of household structures, whatever, like I mean, I don't mean a physical structure, but like a complex, in terms of a whole household of things. Like, would there be lots or multiple? Am I asking a dumb question? I have no idea what I'm asking. Even like, is this something that was like all over the place in like a certain city? Or I would imagine it's like there's one in this city and it's kind of the sort of what the whole town revolves around.
Exactly. Yeah. So starting in the 4000s BC or so, right, we start to see our first big important buildings that kind of resemble temples. They could be a temple already, they could be a chief's household or whatever. And these are like you said, the center around which the larger settlement is created. So people move to the settlement. Frustratingly, we know basically nothing about if there were tribal structures and different lineages and clans. We don't know. Like there's some evidence. It's frustratingly little to say how it would have worked that people are moving to the city from all these different places, probably different cultural, language, religious background, and so on. But we do know that, over the course of the 3000s and early 2000s, people are moving to the cities from elsewhere. And probably the temple is the main, the focus of the culture that all of them are, you move to Uruk, you accept that Inanna is the goddess, you accept that this temple has is the main economic engine of the city. As for how many, generally a city will have a couple of major temples that have hundreds or maybe a couple thousand dependents. that, the king and queen, usually if they are not literally living in the building and doing the religious rites, a couple of times a year, there will be a major religious festival that the king and the queen play the major role, probably some kind of procession, some kind of sacred marriage ritual, moving from the major temples to the other major temples to visit and make sure the god, has FaceTime with all their followers.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a couple major temples and then a whole lot of minor kind of neighborhood shrines. So we actually have a pretty good record of this from the lower Diyala River. So these are the sites of Eshnuna and Tutub. The modern site name of Tutub is Kafaja. So, we have excavated the big temples there from the early 2000s, but we've also excavated kind of just random parts of the city. So we have individual domestic households, and then sometimes adjacent to the households or just like crammed in between them, we have a temple-like building, but it's only one room. Or, it's a specifically non-domestic space. It's often walled off from most of the rest of the neighborhood, but, it has an altar or it has some other fixture that it's clearly used as a religious space. So if we knew more, I should specify, when I said we have basically no evidence about clans and structures like that, we have some land sale records that show that often several people, up to a couple dozen people, have to sign off on selling their land to a rich guy. So we have records of all these people. They're all related to each other. They all have common ancestors. They're all selling this land at once. So that suggests to us that there are groups of extended family structures, like a clan or something, that has collective rights to farmland that it can't be sold unless all of them agree. That is pretty much all we have.
Yeah.
And there's some evidence I was reading recently that maybe even if they're not literal family structures, things like, smiths and carpenter, various artisanal crafts may have been conceived of like clans, in that when you send your son to apprentice with them, they become the quote unquote son of that family. And they, even if they're not related by blood, the craft is passed down from master to apprentice.
Yeah. Like a family union.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, guilds and unions and family structures were very coterminous.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, even just having that kind of land sale documentation, like that's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And again, we're just cuneiform and the way that they preserve or unintentionally preserve things. It's so interesting. I mean, the thing, obviously the thing, well, not obviously, but the thing that does like always completely warp my mind is like the length of time that I mean, I don't even want to say, I want to say Mesopotamia broadly, because there were so many, people, and like, so you look at the Sumerians, what they were around for a really long time, right? Like what kind of, were there big like sort of changes in what we know of the weaving world, or the whole, just like kind of how it all functioned over the, centuries, millennia that the Sumerians were going? For lack of a better term.
As far as the technology, I don't really, I don't know.
Fair.
To be honest, I don't know of any big technological changes. And to be honest, that's kind of the case for most of the ancient world. I mean, all of the important stuff was figured out by the 3000s BC at the latest. And they kind of kept doing that for thousands of years. And, like I was listening to Patrick Wyman. I don't know if you know him. But he was talking about kind of, because we live after the Industrial Revolution, we're used to thinking of we're used to thinking of historical change as technological change, right? That when people hear about the Bronze and the Iron Age, like, okay, well, they invented a better kind of weapon that allowed them to win more wars. And that's not really the case. Most of the advancements were in terms of social organization, right? You get more people together in a kingdom or a city or whatever. And that's kind of what happened in the 3000s when you get people moving to cities. It's kind of like an industrial revolution in the sense that they're moving from their rural subsistence agricultural lifestyle to a city where it has a much more, complex division of labor. They are working for, kind of elites in the, it's a much more complicated economy and political structure than living in a village and tending your sheep and whatever. Yeah. I don't know where I was going with that, but that's where the weaving workshops come from.
No, that's really interesting. And like I think it is something you think of, a lot of like, or not evolution, but technological advancements and all of these things. And it's just, I don't know, it's interesting with them specifically because I'm going to completely give away how little I know about this region, but like the Sumerians were the earliest, were they?
Depends on,
I mean, in
long
Mesopotamia.
answer, kind of.
Okay.
So they're the earliest, they're the ones who invent writing. So from our perspective,
Right.
they are the first
Yeah.
to do a lot of things. There's a book by Samuel Noah Kramer called History Begins at Sumer, just because they give us our first evidence for a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
They weren't the first city. So the first city is in northern Syria. It's called Tel Brak. And that seems to have reached a size of 10 to 20,000 people in the early 3000s.
Wow.
At a time when there are cities in southern Mesopotamia and Sumer. There are cities, but they're nowhere near that big.
Yeah.
So
That's big.
technically they got there first, but we don't have any text from them.
Right.
They do seem to have been working on kind of a parallel track towards inventing writing. They have a system of potter's marks and apparently a system of numerical note keeping. So they were kind of right there 500 years before the Sumerians, but they didn't get there. So they may have been colonized by the Sumerians.
Right. Well, that's, I mean, when you're talking about such early times in human history, it's like, God, yeah. I mean, first is obviously relative. It's about just what we know versus any kind of like reality. But that alone is interesting. It's just the whole, I don't know, the whole region. Like when were this is terrible. I'm so sorry. My brain. When were the Egyptians? They were like almost the same time.
Pretty much the same.
Egyptians,
yeah, they invent writing almost at the same time.
Yeah, okay. Great. At least I'm not crazy
I
in getting
I don't know either. I
know.
Either.
I was like,
I always just remember Egypt is early.
Yeah, no,
than
same,
people
exactly.
think.
Where I'm like, no, like they're the same, right? I mean, I just know that by the time the Mycenaeans were out doing anything, the pyramids were already there, and they were like, these people are wacky. But that's what I got. So, this is my professional job. I clearly know what I'm talking about. No, it's just, it's so fascinating. I'm so obsessed with like what we can or can't know from like so flippin' long ago. I would love to hear more of whatever. Obviously, I don't know quite what the direction, or if women in general, or what if you've exhausted your weaving knowledge. What else?
Well, we can talk about mythology if you want.
Please.
Yes.
Yeah. So the weaving goddess was named Utu with two T's. So Uttu, not the sun god whose name is Utu.
Helpful.
So
Great.
she is not a major character in the narratives from mythology, but she figures in the creation myths because, at the beginning of time, the gods hand down the social roles, and there are actually a number of female goddesses that are connected with crafts like working with stone and like jewelry and stuff like that.
That's cool.
Yeah, so it's not just a bunch of men have man jobs and then one woman is a weaver.
Yeah.
But Utu is kind of
like the Greeks, you say?
Yeah, exactly. Utu is kind of the archetypal woman. Therese Rodin wrote I think it's like a thesis or something, but it's been very useful to me because she goes through these myths about Enki and his wife. And Enki is a kind of creator god that figures, he also figures prominently in these creation myths. So, Utu is kind of the archetypal woman. She is given the archetypal female task. And she also, I mentioned this myth last time I was here, actually. But this is the one I mentioned that has these interesting connections to Adam and Eve. So this is the myth Enki and Ninhursanga. And basically it's a kind of disjointed myth. They're kind of three separate parts and it's unclear how they relate to each other. But broadly, it's a creation story. Yeah. So this book I mentioned by Therese Rodin, she's kind of arguing that at an earlier stage in development, the creation myths were more focused on female creativity and reproduction because the humans are created by Enki's wife, who is the goddess of motherhood and birth, but also pottery and making statues out of clay.
Wow.
So, and there's also a persistent Sumerian symbolic connection between clay pots and kilns and the womb. So this kind of like complex symbolic relationship between building a human figure out of clay. Obviously, we have many, 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 many figurines from prehistory. You fire that in the womb, which is the kiln that becomes a person. And then, of course, the woman herself is the kiln. And then the thing that comes out of it is a person that is the clay that's been fired. So that seems
right.
like... Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
Like that's how I'm pretty sure that's exactly how it works. Yeah,
that's biology. Yeah.
So in this story, we have the same kind of narratives and the same kind of goddess that literally creates humanity. And but we have Enki inserted into it, and his penis is very symbolically important and plays a major role. And that may be Yeah, as Teresa Redan suggests, that may be kind of like trying to make the male role more important, and it may be a kind of reflection of a trickster character. So Enki is a trickster. So there, tricksters appear in all kinds of world folklores, and often there's a book by Paul Radin about the Winnebago trickster. There's this long kind of story, and it's all kind of comical, right? There's farting and shitting, and there's dick stuff. There's apparently a common North American trope where he like either removes his penis, he's like hot girls bathing over there, so he finds a way to like cut off his penis and move it over there, or he finds a way to like extend it like a hose, and then suffers some kind of mishap. So it may be that Enki is this kind of trickster character, and all of these funny misadventures involving his genitalia or whatever end up as part of the serious hallowed creation myth. So it's not clear exactly, but either way. So at the beginning of the story, Enki is the Sumerians are kind of a wetland ecosystem. So Enki's wandering around, quote, digging his phallus into the dikes, plunging his phallus into the reed beds. So he's literally plowing the muddy ground with his dick. And
as men do.
No, this tracks. I think this tracks actually. Men are weird sometimes.
Yeah. So Enki sees his wife and he's like, hey, let's have sex. So they have sex. And then she gives birth to a goddess, her daughter. And then Enki sees his daughter wandering around. He's like, oh, let's have sex with her. So it depends on the version, but 3 or 4 times.
We love early gods. They're just doing great stuff all the time. Yeah.
Well, and like the thing about trickster stories is that part of their social purpose is to teach why social practices exist the way they do. Right. So we show the trickster violating the rules that we know exist to show us why that's a bad idea, why that turns out badly for him. So that these are why we have the proper rules of marriage.
Yeah.
So the third or fourth daughter that he has sex with is Utu, the weaving goddess. So previously, the daughters don't seem to have had any feelings one way or the other about the fact that their father is impregnating them. But Utu talks to her mother, right, the Creation goddess. And the mother says, I'm going to give you some advice. And the parents giving advice is a very kind of like common, trope in Sumerian mythology. That's cute. Yeah. So her mother tells her, like, don't let him have sex with you until he brings you cucumbers, apples, grapes, and then say, after that point, quote, you will indeed have hold of my halter. So this is the creation of bride wealth, right? So this is the legitimate Sumerian, marriage ceremony where the man can't have access to the woman unless he brings her food for the wedding banquet.
Yeah.
So this is historically attested. We know that in Sumer, bride wealth wasn't necessarily an exchange of livestock that you would keep and add to your herd, as it was in some other cultures. It was mostly the groom's family pays for the wedding banquet, and you load up a cart with food, you bring it to the bride's family's household. If they agree, then that food becomes a wedding banquet. So it's kind of like an ideology about how this tradition came to be, this legitimate marriage.
And cucumber. I just have to flag that one. That's
cucumber.
I'm thrilled to hear that cucumber is high on the list.
Oh yeah.
I guess when I think of Persian cucumbers, those are a very nice type of cucumber. They must be all from that area, and I didn't think of cucumbers ever. Sorry, now apparently I can pick up on anything.
The name changes that have the different names of the different kingdoms in the same period always fucks with my brain, because that's why I'm like, this is why I'm a Hellenist. Because my favorite thing, though, at the same time, is when I talk to like modern historians, I say that like as if like medieval historians, and I feel so uppity to them. I'm like, you look at the 1100s, I look at like that's modern to me, and then I talk to people who are like,
in Sumeria,
and I'm just like, I'm the youngest child here.
And I think that's the most interesting part about ancient history or history generally, and also the thing that like I think gets kind of like lost in how we're taught to learn about it is just like the volume of time that is like spanning and. Yeah, it's just so much more interesting if you like really center yourself in like just how long ago and just how much time passes.
And the thing I think I really like about looking at sort of like that region, Mesopotamia, sort of whatever, is it really forces you to think about what does a society need to rise versus like, let's look at the political bullshit that happens in like Greece, and like whatever. It like I find it's because like so much of sort of world culture is kind of actually started in this region, right? Like Greece was inhabited by people who moved over from the Fertile Crescent back in prehistory. Like we're actually, by looking at that region, we are being forced to think about what is it exactly that feeds a society, that helps a society grow, that is beyond sort of the power structures. Like what are the everyday things that help, you know, uplift people so that we can expand. And so stuff like, you know, getting to a point where we can have these complexes where we can have this much like weaving going on. It's like, how do we get there? You know? And it's just the perfect area of the world for it too. I mean, it's called the Fertile Crescent for a reason. I mean, it is, it's wonderful. But yeah, anyways, that's my thing.
No, but I think to link right back to this mythos, like it's so interesting hearing such like an early form. Like I feel like I can almost see sort of ripples of these kinds of early stories in the way that the Greek kind of, you know, cosmogony, the whole creation of the world, like the way that is formed. I regularly look at that and I'm, you know, wondering about what echoes are like in those stories, because they are so clearly calling on earlier things, and this feels like one of those. What do you have, Michaela? You look so alert.
Oh, the that exact thing of how we know myths are shared and whatever. Yeah. It's like Greece is not a place that gets flooded. It does not get flooded. So, but then we have the Deucalion and Pyrrha story, and it's like, this is not something that happens in Greece, but where in this world that area gets flooded very easily? We have a lot of flood myths. You know, Mesopotamia area. So it's like, absolutely, that story comes from people having contact in there, and the Greeks being like, we need our own flood story.
Yeah.
Like that's
those nice people over there have one. But meanwhile,
it's the sharing. It's because
you
the sharing of culture too.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, just to really even just remind the listeners, because I love this one, but also like the Greeks were seeing that place and they were like, well, that's a city between two rivers. You know, we'll give it a name and we'll register, you know, how fertile, but also like, the floods and all of this thing. But that's my really, you know, poorly phrased way of reminding the listeners that the word Mesopotamia is just Greek for between two rivers.
The amount of times I don't think about that, and then whenever
it took
really
me like
looking at it, I think we had that moment together. I think we had that realization.
I had it in the because I had it in the most delightfully stupid of ways. In that, like this is just how my ancient history brain works. Is that one day I was looking at the different mythological locations to the Greek underworld, of which there are a few, and I was on a modern map and I was trying to find there's one in like the middle of the mainland on the west side, and I was like, oh, where is this one? And I was looking on a modern map for this entrance to the underworld, and I saw that there is still a little Greek town that is called Mesopotamia. And I looked at that modern Greek town with that name and I said, Jesus fucking Christ, Liv, the word means between two rivers. And it took me looking at it written in Greek and like on a modern map for me to be like, duh. And anyway, I just love that. But I also think of all the ways in which the Greeks influenced how we see the much more ancient world. And that's a bizarre thing too. Like the Western civilization of it all, like these people who came 2,000 years later get to give the name that we now use to describe. Like, it's
tell a really stupid story that is completely off topic, but it's just sort of that realization of, oh, that's what a word means, or that's how that thing works. When I was like in grade 9 or something, I remember I was sitting in science class with my friends, and then I went, oh my god. And they were like, what? I went, Kanga and Roo. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, kangaroo. And they were like, Michaela, yes.
I don't know kangaroo.
From Winnie the Pooh. Kanga, the mother kangaroo.
I thought you meant that I knew. I thought you meant that the etymology of the word kangaroo was linked to something.
No.
Got
it. I doubt it.
That's
yes. But like sort of moments like that happen with Greek all the time. Yeah. Where I'm just like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. But I don't know.
Well, and it's just even English words. This one came up in a recent conversation, and I'll use it to pull us right back to the right region. Well, not that's a forced analogy, but that like the modern Greek word, and I guess it's the ancient Greek word as well, for giraffe is camelli pardali, which is literally just spotted camel, because so many things are based on how the Greeks imagined stuff. And at some point they got to see a giraffe and they were like, well, gosh, I think that looks just like a spotted camel. And then now that's just still the word.
Honestly, fair.
Which I find delightful. And again, that was my forced, because I'm sure they're not giraffes, or I'm sure they do not have giraffes in ancient Iraq. But still. Yeah, I guess I'm just obsessed with that. But I would love to hear more of the mythology. This idea that there was, like, I don't know, there's so much more women involved in this early mythology. And I guess that's what I'm desperate to hear more of. It's like, does the whole weaving goddess, does her whole, I mean, the marriage stuff, I feel like you weren't even done. We just got all talking about from cucumbers.
No, yeah, just to finish up this myth I was talking about. Right. So Enki, wants to have sex with his most recent daughter. Her mother, his wife, has told her to demand bride wealth, basically.
And a cucumber that took us way off track. Apologies.
Yep. It was all good. So Enki, even though he is now bound by these cultural customs, he's still going to find a trick to find a loophole. So he has to procure the vegetables from a gardener. So he disguises himself as a gardener and knocks on her door and says, I'm a gardener. Let me give you these fruits, on behalf of Enki. So this is actually, we have another myth that kind of like shows the marriage process more in greater detail. So basically, when the groom's family wanted to marry, they would send a representative to the bride's family. So the word is kuli, which means like friend in Sumerian. Aww. So it can be a friend of the groom or just one of his cousins or whatever. So that, so the bride's family can decline politely and not ruin anyone's day. And also just, it's part of the custom. We have very similar traditions in modern West Asia. So here Enki is disguising himself as a gardener, bringing fruits ostensibly from Enki, even though he is Enki. So this is enough. Utu opens the door, they have sex. And then this is when, as I said last time, this is when Enki's wife tricks him into impregnating himself so that he can know the pain of childbirth. And then he has to go through this whole process to give birth to out of his various body parts so that he learns the lesson.
I see. Okay. I'm fucking obsessed with that because, again, I mean, I'm sure you told it to me before, so I apologize for acting like I haven't heard it. But that's how my brain is. But like, once again, I imagine I am obsessed with this idea because, like, I can see where it gets brought into Greek mythology while simultaneously bringing the women down a few notches. And that's what I can see in, like, just from what that entire myth, I can see all of this evidence of it. Like, it's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, I just feel like throughout ancient culture, you can just really watch the solidification of the patriarchal stranglehold that it got on society. But that's wild.
Actually, yeah. I was listening, Liv, to your the podcast you did with Ancient History Fangirl recently.
Oh God!
And
did I do one? On their show?
I believe so.
Yeah, great. That one was recorded ages ago, but I saw that they dropped it recently. I was like, "What did I record recently?"
You were like, "Oh no!"
I know. I was like, "What did I forget?" But yes, now I know what you're talking about.
No, but I you just made me think of Zeus giving birth out of his thigh.
Yeah,
and I think on that podcast you recorded ages ago, one of you were wondering. Or I think someone said that thigh is a euphemism for genitalia.
They love to say that, and I'm not convinced yet. So, are you here to convince?
I don't know about Greek.
Okay.
In Mesopotamia, in Sumerian, the word for thigh also means loins. So in poetry about sex, they use the same word for both. That may be one of these, like, it's a joke in Greek because they're referencing a Babylonian tradition or whatever. So I can't speak to the Greek, but in Sumerian, the thigh is a euphemism for genitalia.
All right. Well, you know what? If anyone was going to get that and it wasn't me, it would be those guys, because Jen and Jenny are better at looking at other cultures in addition to Greek. So that sounds right. But no, there is that moment, because that's how Dionysus is born from Zeus after he kills Dionysus's mother. Because again, like the Greeks always have this, like, you can see this, the kind of mirror of the myth while plucking out the women a little bit.
Right.
Because there's that moment with Zeus, but then there's also Athena, right, who he gives birth to via his head because he ate her mother. And I just think it's so interesting because in the Greek, at least in the sources that we have, there's no connection to a man experiencing childbirth or like that being part of it at all. And that makes such a big difference, you know, whereas in the Greek, the reason that kind of functions is to like have a way for Zeus to be like, why can't I think of the word? But anyway, the way he can make a child on his own.
Things without a woman. It's moving.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And yeah, so it's not about like a man experiencing childbirth in that case. It is about a man subsuming a woman's role completely, you know, and it's really interesting to see the kind of like an alternate side of it. But even still with like the earliest stories of the Greeks, you know, they make Gaia creates the world, but then she immediately creates a man who like suffocates her. Like there's all these different like kind of layers of it. And to see a sort of earlier story that involves the women in a more natural and like actual biological way is really it's interesting. And now I'm a little bit obsessed with making those comparisons. But so does the weaving goddess, does she end up doing more you said she wasn't in many narratives, which makes sense. Is there more beyond that kind of creation story, which was also delightful?
So, I don't know. There's two other kind of shorter mentions.
Oh, great.
Just real quick though, no, yeah. So in the one I was just talking about, you know, Enki is tricked into impregnating himself, and his birth goddess wife has to help him give birth, and the way she does that is by literally putting him inside her vulva. So again, he gives birth out of his various body parts, and those become different gods that are named. Their names are puns on those body part names. But still he has to rely on female reproductive capacity in order to undo what he did to himself.
That's interesting. See again. Wow.
And I don't know if you were suggesting this earlier, but I don't know, just the theme of a father preying on his children at the beginning of time reminds me of you know, Uranus and Kronos and Zeus.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if you mentioned it on the show, but we have a Hurrian myth that is exactly that. Exactly the story of Uranus and then Kronos and then Zeus.
Oh my gosh. No. What is Hurrian?
Yeah. So these are it's a different language that was spoken within the Hittite Empire. Okay. So like Turkey in the late Bronze Age.
Yeah.
So they had a lot of Hurrians, also northern Syria area. So they incorporated a lot of Hurrian myths and like god names and stuff. And we happen to have, you know, written in the Hurrian language, a story about a, you know, tyrant god at the beginning of time who kills all his children and then eats his son, except he actually eats a stone, and then the son blah blah blah, and then you know, cuts off his balls. So that entire story from Hesiod comes directly out of late Bronze Age, you know, story from West Asia.
See, this is what I need. I just really wish that somebody had just made a book that is exactly what I want to learn. This is the problem. There's just too many things to pick at.
The problem is there probably is a book out there.
I know,
and then it's buried somewhere.
Yeah, deep. Or like impossible to read. Yeah, because it's just there has to be so many connections to be made that like result in the theogony, because like. And Hesiod was just, what a fucking guy. Oh, what is this? Oh, from Hittite to Homer. Oh, and I know that cute little guy on the cover. He's in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm writing that down, from Hittite to
Homer. This is exactly the book you want.
Yeah. It sounds like the problem is the Homer, but I mean, it still works. I'm sure it's the book I want. No, because there are. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, now that, because clearly you're just like a wealth of these myths that I can connect to Greek ones. Do you have anything else up your sleeve, or any other fun Sumerian ones that are or are not related to weaving? I'm keen for anything. Well,
so there's like the most interesting Sumerian goddess is Inanna, right? So most Sumerian gods, both male and female, are perfect in every way. They are the perfect king or queen. They are noble and patient and so on, and they always do the right thing.
That's interesting. That's not like Greek.
Yeah. Well, it kind of makes for a boring story. Well, and
Yeah.
I think the main difference from Greek is that we have the narratives produced by the temples.
Right.
Whereas,
yeah.
the Greeks were, sharing stories that were passed down because they were interesting and not the official propaganda of the temple.
Yeah. So actually, that's a great lead-in question. And this is I will be honest, entirely from my own knowledge, and maybe because I'm writing the Odyssey for kids. But did the Sumerians or just in that realm, did they also? I imagine they had oral storytelling as a major theme among them, but that's not something that necessarily survives in the same way. Is that kind of what you're saying? That like the stories that we have are from the temple, but they would have had oral storytelling?
Right. So we do have epics, like epic poems that are very much in the kind of
Gilgamesh
tradition.
Right,
Gilgamesh and Iliad and so on. These are mostly stories about the legendary early kings of Uruk. Right. So Gilgamesh, we have, I think, five or six, depending on how you count, Sumerian poems about Gilgamesh, and we have 4 other long narratives about other kings of Uruk. And these are, obviously they're written, right? They were canonized in the sense that they were written down in a very standardized way by the time we have the texts. But they clearly show evidence of having been an oral medium before that. There's all kinds of repetition and kind of like poetic, stuff.
Yeah.
And they, like, in terms of subject matter, there are, Inanna plays a major role. There are gods and stuff, but mostly it's an adventure story. It's about a war between 2 kingdoms. There's, magical creatures and so on.
I know. I can't believe I asked that question when the Epic of Gilgamesh exists. Can I just say that's just where my brain is at today? Like, duh. Yeah. But I'm still very thrilled for your answer. That did not sound like duh. So thank you.
Well, I mean, Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh is later, right? So
no, I know, but I also had a conversation that featured it in like a week ago. So it's really just my brain going into near ridiculous levels of smush. But yeah, it's still, I'm glad to know that we have this like palace propaganda style though too. Like, yeah. Sorry, keep going on everything.
No, just in terms of like, in the Odyssey, Odysseus goes to the island of Scheria, right? And there's the bard there that tells the Homeric story. And we have a similar thing in one of the Gilgamesh stories, where in the Sumerian version, the bowl of heaven is sent, to punish him and ravage Uruk and stuff. And he is hanging out in his palace, and his bard, and he's like drinking beer, and his bard is singing a song about how Gilgamesh is being a coward by not going out and fighting the bull. So like within the bardic narrative, we have the image of the bard singing a bardic narrative.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, that's the story within a story is always the best. I mean, clearly because I like the Odyssey, but I mean, that one feels fun because that sounds like you're just directly like kind of insulting Gilgamesh. Like, at least in the Odyssey, it's very much like, oh, here's this bard going to sing about all the other great things Odysseus did. But this is much more like, dude, what the fuck are you doing?
Yes, and actually, on the topic of thigh being a euphemism for genitalia,
please.
In the Gilgamesh and the bull story, Gilgamesh, defeats and kills the bull, and then Inanna was the reason the bull was sent, so he throws the bull's haunch at her and it slaps her in the face. And I've heard it suggested that he's actually throwing the bull's pizzle at her, and it's another euphemism.
Fantastic. To bring us back to that for the past bit since we started talking about that, I have
You've been looking into the etymology?
Been looking at my dictionaries and
everything.
I was hoping. What I want, Liv, is if you can find me the OG Greek of Dionysus popping out of the thigh so I can see exactly what word they use. Yeah. Because from my understanding, in Latin, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Euphemism for it. But in Greek, it's not until Koine Greek, so later periods, where the actual word for thigh, meros, becomes a euphemism for loins. In the earlier periods, meros would have been very much about the thigh, and specifically because it was tied with sacrifice. So the thigh bone, and sort of that area being something sacrificed. So in earlier Greek, it doesn't look like it was used as much as a euphemism.
Wow.
But Latin, 100% absolutely. And so,
I mean, I'm fairly willing to bet, because I can't think offhand, Dionysus origin mythology is often quite late. what we have of it. So I'm willing to bet that what survives is from a later period when maybe that was more of a euphemism. Maybe. I think this is all to say that this thing that has, honestly, I love Jen and Jenny, to make very clear. They are two of my closest friends in the world.
They're delightful.
And that is something that I have spent years being like, I don't know, guys. I really just like it as that it's in his thigh. Like, not everything has to be a euphemism for balls, okay? And so I'm feeling a little bit like I did them wrong here, but we'll see about how much we can prove.
Complicated. What can we actually say?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. The problem is it's this is nice, out of love. They're too certain in their statements, but that's true for like and because I don't know how to be certain about a
that's
statement.
That's why I love studying ancient history, like classics and later, is you don't get to be certain on
exactly.
anything.
I love that.
There is no fucking certainty. You can't say, there's very little things you can say for a fact, and that's what I love about it, because you get to sit here and have conversations and like build off of each other, and history is made in the conversations of things. And so also it took me way too long. Like I was like, okay, I know how to say thigh, that's meros, and then I was sitting here and I was like, how do you say penis in Greek? I sat here for way too long. Liv, know it.
Yeah, I know I do.
It's phallos. And I googled it and I went, oh, I'm dumb today.
Yeah. No, the problem is when they're too obvious.
Yeah, because I'm also like looking at in my dictionary, right? My actual like Little and Scott. Is this Homeric? No, it's classical Greek and biblical. And so, but even it says meros is the upper part of the thigh or the ham.
The ham.
So it's very animal based. Well, then when I went to phallos, membrum virile, a figure thereof.
Membrum virile. The Latin. Romans are fucking weird.
No, this is my Greek dictionary.
I know, but that was Latin.
I know, but it's like it's Little and Scott is great, except for it's so old. That's the problem with all the dictionaries, and I don't know if
they did a new one.
Sumerian stuff has the same problem. They were made so long ago, like 100+ years ago, and they have never updated the language to actually follow along to where we're at society. So we'll read something and I'll be like, what the fuck does that word mean? I don't even use that word in English these days. I have to Google the word. I'm like, oh, okay. There was we were translating Suetonius's Life of Nero, and it's talking about the spectacles he puts on, and one of them was like pacifying the bull.
Lovely.
And there was a word used in there, and it was absolutely like, when going to the dictionary and everything, it was like had intercourse, mounted, and I translated it as bonked. So I was just like, this makes more sense. I like this better. This works better for our modern day English. They had the bull bonk pacife. Anyway,
the ancient people and their bull. I don't even know. No, slightly going off the rails. You've gotten a particularly ADHD heavy day from us, and you've handled it incredibly well. This is so interesting. Do you have? Okay, I mean, we could wrap up. I don't know what timing you have, or if you have a bit more. The mythology is really been very entertaining. Do you have anything else that you just like keep in your hat for like weird Sumerian myth? It doesn't even have to be connected to anything we've talked about today. I just am now obsessed with it.
Well, I do have one, one little myth where Utu's not a major character, but it is another creation myth about Enki.
Great.
So it's again very, very penis heavy. He ejaculates out the Tigris.
Wow.
Which is so this is a pun in Sumerian, because the words for father and water and another word I forget, but it's a pun where he becomes the father of the river, because father, semen, and water are all like the letter A.
Beautiful.
And it describes that as a bridal gift, literally bride wealth. So again, we have a ideology about Enki inventing bride wealth with this penis. And then
the whole fucking river.
Yes.
Of course.
I love ancient mythology. They're so wacky.
But yeah, so as he's giving all the gods their various roles, he invents weaving. He appoints Utu the goddess of weaving. Right. So he's the quote is, he picked out the tow from the fibers and set up the loom. Enki greatly perfected the task of women. Enki placed in charge of them Utu, the conscientious woman, the silent one. So obviously female gender roles there.
Yep.
But when he's given all the gods their roles, Inanna comes and she's angry that he didn't give her a specific role, because Inanna was kind of too important to be the goddess of any one thing.
Yeah.
So like, books will say she's the goddess of sex and statecraft and war, which is true. But she's also a bunch of other things, like shepherding and stuff. So Inanna comes to Enki and she says, basically, why didn't you give any roles? And Enki says to Inanna, I placed in your hands the spindle and the hairpin. I settled on you the staff and the crook with the shepherd stick behind them or beside them. So here Inanna is associated with livestock, but also her roles kind of intersect with Utu, right? If she has the spindle as part of her, symbolism. So as he's talking to Inanna, he says, I made you tangle straight threads. I made you straighten out tangled threads. I made you put on garments. I made blah, blah, blah. I made you pick out the tow from the fibers. I made you spin with a spindle. I made you color tufted. I made you color tufted cloth with colored threads. And then here's the line I quoted last time. Inanna, you heap up human heads like piles of dust. You sow heads like seed. Inanna, you destroy what should not be destroyed. So on the one hand, we see that her roles do intersect with Utu. She is also, she also has, control or authority or whatever over weaving and women's work. And specifically, Inanna is kind of a god of chaos. So the idea of like sorting out tangled threads or weaving together threads that are not currently tangled, the kind of like liminality between chaos and order, that Inanna is kind of the god of that in particular. And that's also true with gender roles and all kinds of other things, that Inanna is kind of the god of liminality. So I don't know, there's Inanna's role overlapping with Utu.
Yeah. Inanna generally is so interesting. And am I right? Ishtar is a later name, right? Inanna's earlier.
Yeah. So Ishtar is the name in the Semitic language of Akkadian. So Assyrian and Babylonian are dialects of Akkadian, and this is Semitic language, whereas Sumerian is linguistic isolate. So it's the same goddess more or less, and they were worshipped by the same name at the same time, just by different people.
Interesting.
And then eventually people stopped speaking Sumerian.
Yeah. Okay. That's I just always know. I mean, I remember the connection from having looked into any of this, but specifically, she is this goddess who gets linked to Aphrodite in a lot of ways, which I've always thought is like both interesting, and I think it feels like either kind of a hit on Inanna or a compliment to Aphrodite to make those kinds of connections, because Inanna is so much more powerful, I think, than any one Greek goddess. Like the Greeks were not keen on giving a woman that much importance in their world. And so it's really interesting to learn about Inanna in that way, because she was then kind of linked to Aphrodite. And there are, there's connections to be made that lead from Inanna to, Astarte in Phoenicia, and then to Aphrodite, and kind of, again, like you're watching like a decline in importance. But it sounds to me like Inanna, I mean, it sounds like I could name like 5 different Greek goddesses and put them all into one, and that would be more equivalent to Inanna. And go ahead.
I mean, if you think about a goddess who is the goddess of war and statecraft, who exercises a lot of male roles, who is kind of the person that a king will consult when he wants wise counsel. I mean, that's Athena, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And, that is kind of what happens to Inanna, who is at the very least closer in time to a period when women would have had a bigger, role in public and social life. And even in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is written later than the Sumerian poems, we can kind of see this decline in status for Inanna, where, Gilgamesh throwing some part of a bowl at her face is certainly disrespectful. If it's a penis, even more so. And then the Shamhat, the quote unquote temple prostitute, when Enkidu is dying, he curses her and says, like, I curse you to be a streetwalker. You will be the lowest of the low. And then he kind of thinks about it and then takes it back and then blesses her instead. So we kind of get a view of this kind of ambivalence of, okay, well, these women who are associated with the temple household of Ishtar at that point, who it's unclear what quote unquote temple prostitution is or was or whatever.
Yeah.
But, it's unclear how we feel about this. Do we have this kind of old reverence for it? Or do we live in this urban economy where these are the most abused women, the most exploited women, the woman who can be quote unquote purchased for a small sum of money? Do we have the greatest disrespect for them, or are we holding on to this old reverence? And the Epic of Gilgamesh is not quite sure.
Yeah, well, and I know that we would have talked about this heavily last time, so I won't rehash too much, but like that's probably in large part due to the really fragmentary nature of like the older versions of Gilgamesh, right? Because I know like there are pieces that are super old, but then the like functionally, you know, full length one that we have now is like hundreds and hundreds of years younger, right?
Yes, so that's true of the Babylonian epic. So yeah, basically the what we call the Epic of Gilgamesh probably finished by the end of the 1000s BC. We have some fragments of it back to 1800-ish BC.
Right.
The Sumerian poems are actually a couple hundred years older than that.
Yeah.
So those are probably written in the 21st century BC.
Right. Yeah.
Because there's a particular dynasty that they're connected to.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm just obsessed with all of it. I just want all of the ancient world to like exist in my brain. But that is not practical. Yeah, I mean, I think I could go on about this forever, but we have kept you for an hour and a half of some ADHD wackiness, but also so much information about weaving in a way that, I mean, I assumed you had a lot, but like, I'm fucking obsessed with how much there is. And also just that there was this goddess of that, and in such specific, I don't know, they're just, that was so interesting. Thank you, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I'm obsessed now.
Thanks for having me.
No, I'm very happy to. I want to hear more and more about Sumeria. I mean, or Sumeria, but the Sumerian people. And also, I know that I struggle with what questions to ask because I know so little. So, but this has been really, really fascinating. Do you want to tell the listeners where to find so much more from you, since you have your own whole podcast and I imagine lots of other nerdy exploits?
Yeah. Yeah. So my podcast is called The Drumbeat Forever After. The title is a quote from a Babylonian creation myth. And that is, it's on what you might call informal hiatus, because I'm working a lot of it into a book. And the book is right now more intellectually engaging for me, which is, I guess, great for me, but bad for everyone who wants more podcast content.
Relatable.
I've written more podcast content. It just put together the audio.
Relatable.
So that's that. Maybe more to come in the future, depending on how this project goes. So we'll
Hell
see.
yeah. No, that's wonderful. I mean, I'm excited to hear about this book, so you'll have to come back and talk about it whenever it's more of a reality in whatever way. Yeah. No, this has been utterly fascinating. And this is my brain just fully backfiring. No. Thank you so much. I'm just going to wrap it up so that my brain can like shut it off. But like, honestly, this has been really interesting, and you've been incredibly patient with my brain. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Let's Talk About Myths, Baby is written and produced by the one and only Liv Albert on a wonderful little vacation on the other side of the pond. I think that's something we say anyways. Michaela Pangowish is the Hermes to all your Olympians, the producer struggling to get everything done before her own vacation to Berlin. What's she going to do there? I don't know. We'll find out. Select music by Luke Chaos. Thank you, Luke. The podcast is part of the Memory Collective Podcast Network, a collection of creators that all strive to bring you accurate and reliable information on the ancient world. These include The Wonderful Friends and Movies We Dig, The Partial Historian Sweet Bitter, and so much more. Get ad-free episodes and much more by subscription to the Oracle Edition on Patreon at patreon.com/mythsbaby or via the link in the episode's description. Are you a scholar or academic or an expert in something from antiquity, from Greece to Rome to Egypt to anywhere in the Near East? We would love to have you on the show as a conversation guest. Go to mythsbaby.com/contact and fill out our podcast guest forms. We want to hear from you, so please reach out. Talk to you all next week. Bye-bye.